Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started right at 10 a.m. Welcome to everybody who's just joined and all our speakers and presenters. This is the first session of the fourth annual Sustainable and Resilient Communities Workshop. My name is Sarah Schaefer-Brown. I'm the Long Island Sound Partnership Sustainable and Resilient Communities Extension Professional for Nassau County. And during this Resilience 101 session, we're going to be covering some helpful tools and strategies for building community resilience. And we're going to be learning about local climate impacts and projections, resilience planning tools and strategies, and New York and Connecticut specific climate certification programs. So there will also be a chance for us to break out into New York and Connecticut breakout sessions later in the session, where we'll go into a little bit more detail on those state-specific resources and tools, including the New York State Climate Smart Communities Program and Sustainable CT Program, and the My Coast programs in each state. Okay, so just as a little reminder for all of you, please keep yourself muted and turn your video off unless you're presenting or asked to. That's just so we can preserve bandwidth. And please put any questions you have or comments in the chat. We'll be monitoring that throughout the session. We do have a lot of content to share with you today, and we'll do our best to try to answer all the questions that we receive live. But if we need to move on, we'll be certainly following up after the session with answers to your questions. And just a reminder, you'll see the session will be recorded, and we will be making that available after the webinar, along with all of the other meeting materials. And we'll also share, we'll also be sharing a number of resources and tools during this session today. And we will be sharing direct links to those resources and tools after the meeting. You'll get all of those links. But you can also find all of these materials and information that we're going to be sharing on our Long Island Sound Resilience Resource Hub as well, if you wish to follow along. All right, so today we're going to be running a few interactive polls throughout the meeting to get a sense of who's joining us and to keep this webinar interactive. So most of the polls we'll be running today are through a program called Poll Everywhere. And if you've not used it before, it's pretty simple and fun to use. It allows participants to answer questions on their own computer or phone, and the results show up live on the presentation screen. So you can participate in our Poll Everywhere polls by joining on your computer at pollev.com/listres, and you'll be able to answer in your internet browser window. And you can also participate on your phone by texting listres to 22333. And then if you're participating on your phone, you need to wait till you receive a text notifying you that you've joined the session before you can send in your answer. But don't click on the link that you receive when it tells you that you've joined the session. Now I'm going to get into our first poll. So since our geographic scope is pretty broad, so the entire Long Island Sound coastal boundary, we wanted to get a sense of where you're all joining us from today. So our first poll question is a map. You can click on the map where you're located, and it will automatically populate the map on the screen. Just a note, you cannot participate in the map question on your phone. That's the only one you're not able to participate over the phone, but the rest of the polls you'll be able to access on your phone. So I'll give it a minute just to see who's here. This looks great. See a lot of people from all over the watershed and outside of the watershed, which is really fantastic. Okay, I'm going to click away from the screen, but thank you so much for participating. You should still be able to answer as I click away as well. Okay, so our next poll question, we just like to get a sense of what sector or organization you're representing. We have choices on the screen: federal, state government, indigenous nation or community, local government, nonprofit, watershed organization, community group, consultant, academia, or just an interested individual. We'll give that a minute or so to allow you guys to enter your answer. So it looks like we have a lot of nonprofit representation, a lot of federal or state and local government representation, and a few people from community groups, consulting groups, academia, and interested individuals. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. All right. So now I'm going to get into the content. So some of you already know this, but our group is supporting the larger efforts of the Long Island Sound Partnership, which is a national estuary program created by the US EPA. And it's a partnership to protect and restore the Long Island Sound and its watershed. Many of you are probably familiar with the program's former name, Long Island Sound Study, which was the program's name up until June of this year, and it was officially changed with the launch of the updated Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, or CCMP. So the partnership is a bi-state partnership, which was formed in 1985. It consists of organizations, agencies, scientists, community members who are all working together to protect and restore Long Island Sound. Our program, Long Island Sound Partnership, is guided by four main goals: clean waters and healthy watersheds, thriving habitats and abundant wildlife, sustainable and resilient communities, and informed and engaged public. And so our team is composed of 6 regional SRCs, as we like to call ourselves, or Sustainable and Resilient Communities Extension Professionals. So Elizabeth, myself, Ben, and Sarah Powell, who work for New York Sea Grant, and then Deb and Sarah Schechter, who work for Connecticut Sea Grant. And so we're focused on advancing sustainable and resilient communities, the goal throughout the coastal boundary of the Long Island Sound watershed. And we provide resources and support locally to our respective regions while working in a coordinated effort to advance that sustainable and resilient communities goal at a watershed level scale. So as you can see, the work of the Long Island Sound Partnership is a coordinated effort of many partners. Long Island Sound Partnership, Connecticut Sea Grant, and New York Sea Grant continue to have strong and long-standing bipartisan support. And with the support, we will continue to focus on advancing the objectives highlighted under the goal: empowering Long Island Sound communities to plan for and respond to environmental challenges in ways that prioritize well-being for all. And the objectives under this goal target 3 critical areas of need: to increase the capacity of decision makers to advance initiatives, support resilience planning that reflects community needs, and encourage the implementation of projects that will help communities address flooding and other environmental challenges. And we see these 3 objectives as sequential, with each one building off the former. So the resources, as I mentioned today, are going to be available or are available on our Long Island Sound Resilience Resource Hub. So this website was developed and is maintained by our team. And throughout the session today, you'll get a chance to explore the resources if you haven't not already. It's a one-stop shop for resiliency resources in our region. So now on to the goals for today's session. Me and my colleagues and our speakers on this call are very excited to be with so many of you who are interested in learning more about resilience planning in your community. And so the goals of today's workshop session are to present information on tools that can help you understand environmental risks in your region, share resilience planning and adaptation strategies with you, and provide guidance through state climate certification programs. So here's another poll we'd like you to answer just before we get into the rest of our session. So what climate impacts are you most worried about in your community? And this is a word cloud. So you can type your answer into the response. Note if you're using words, a phrase with two words, you need to connect them with an underscore in order for them to stay connected. So I see flooding, heavy rain, pollution, storms, urban heat, erosion. Coastal flooding. Flooding seems to be still the main impact of concern. Great. Thank you so much for your answers. And I see somebody put in the chat, coastal resiliency. Displacement. Thank you. You can continue to answer this as I move to the next slide, and we'll be sharing this out after the meeting so y'all can see the results along with all the other poll results. All right, so now I'd like to pass on the presentation to Ben Goldberg and Deb Abibu, who will be providing information on environmental impacts and tools and resources.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Goldberg. I am the SRC extension professional for New York City. And today I'm going to be going over some of the main environmental challenges and climate impacts facing our region. I'm going to try to summarize all this information in about 10 minutes because we have a lot to cover today. So apologies if it's a bit tight, but it will be a little high level. But I think that a lot of us are pretty familiar with a lot of these concepts, as I think the last slide showed. So just looking forward to kind of setting the stage for what we're going to be talking about in the rest of today's workshop. So thinking back to kind of what Sarah just highlighted and the goals of today's session, the steps to we would like to highlight here, I think, how this information aligns with what we like to call our steps to resilience, and in thinking about the steps to resilience planning. And it's really important, to first start by highlighting the risks and hazards that your community may be vulnerable to, and really understanding what communities and assets are most vulnerable. And that really begins with really just understanding, what hazards and types of climate risks your community faces. So when thinking about the impacts that face our region, I think the word cloud that we just saw a moment ago actually, I think, already highlighted pretty much all of these. But I'd like to just take a moment to kind of to discuss some of the major impacts that we face and highlight them here. Firstly, being with the increase in greenhouse gases and in our atmosphere, trapping heat, we see, of course, increased temperatures across the globe and in our region, and with that extreme heat. Accompanying that as well, we are experiencing sea level rise, increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather, increase in extreme precipitation, as well as, on the flip side of that, drought. So I'd say that some of those, the impacts I just highlighted first, I see those as we see those as the primary impacts of climate change, and then secondary to that, some of the impacts that are caused by those more primary impacts. We see flooding, of course, and as the cloud showed, that's definitely seems to be the biggest concern for us here in our region, and we encounter flooding of all forms, whether that's coastal, tidal, rainfall, groundwater, or riverine, and then of course erosion, particularly for our more coastal communities. So again, I'm just going to be going over these at a pretty high level, providing some information on observed and projected changes for all these impacts. And then Deb is going to follow after me with a little more information and on tools that can help you visualize some of these impacts. And I'm going to start by really just going over four key impacts highlighted here: temperature, sea level rise, extreme weather events, and precipitation. So let's talk about temperature a bit. As we all know, average temperatures across the globe and in our region are increasing, and with that as well, the phenomenon of extreme heat. As you can see from the bar chart on the graph on the left, you can see that temperatures have been rising, pretty gradually in our region. This shows temperatures in New York State over the last century and shows that they've risen by about 2.6 degrees on average annually in New York State. The chart just below that, or the maps just below that, show projected temperature increases for New York State. The numbers are probably too small to read, but if we look closely and look back to the kind of original source, you can see that temperatures are projected to rise in our region by about up to 6 degrees by the 2050s and up to 10 degrees on average by the 2080s. That's an annual average. And what that is quite substantial, and it's worth noting that heat is the deadliest disaster both for the country and in New York State. So it's something that we definitely need to take seriously and definitely need to be planning for. We know that summers are getting hotter, heat waves are becoming more frequent and lasting longer, and as shown by some of the numbers on this slide. And of course, though, heat is not something that's necessarily experienced evenly. Of course, in our region, one thing that we need to think about in particular is the urban heat island effect. Being a region that's so highly urbanized, particularly in an area where I work in, like New York City, materials of the built environment, such as concrete, asphalt, and buildings, actually trap and absorb heat, quite literally making cities hotter than surrounding areas. And even within smaller urban areas themselves, there can be quite vast differences in heat and how temperature is felt due to amount of impervious surface and lack of green space. So these are all things to consider when thinking about how to plan for extreme heat and how to mitigate some of those worst impacts. The next kind of impact I wanted to discuss, of course, is sea level rise. So if we look at, back at historic data, we can see that sea level has risen by about 8 inches in our region since 1970. And going back even further, as these charts show, for New York City, sea level has risen by by over a foot, about or 13 inches in the last century. That might not seem tremendous, but in actuality, if you live in a tidal area, you might already be experiencing frequent tidal flooding, at high tides, and that's something you're already living with and dealing with on a regular basis. Another fact for our region that's, I think, important to note is that sea level is actually rising faster here than globally. And that's largely due to the phenomenon of subsidence or the sinking of land in the Long Island Sound area due to a variety of factors. But what that means is, that we're actually experiencing sea level rise at roughly a double the average global rate. And then, of course, looking into the future, and thinking about future projections, we all know that sea level is expected to rise. As temperatures continue to increase, we will be continuing to see our sea levels rising. And depending on what scenario you're looking at, whether that's a low, intermediate, or high emission scenario, that's going to help you gauge, what level of sea level rise you should be planning for into the future, and where you might need to be thinking about relocating, critical facilities or development or elevating infrastructure and other types of measures that we'll be getting into further along in today's conversation. The next major, kind of impact I wanted to highlight for us today is extreme weather. I don't think I need to, belabor the point, but I think we all know that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and severe with a changing climate. In our area, that obviously there's a lot of different factors at play and how, different types of disasters may be experienced. But in our region, one thing that we're thinking often about is the risk of hurricanes. And as temperatures are rising, both in the atmosphere and in the ocean, that drives up the risk for more frequent and severe coastal storms. As the map here shows, there were actually $18 billion weather related disasters in the US in 2022. If you compare that to the 1980s, there was on average just $1 billion weather disaster every 4 months. Now there is one on average every 3 weeks. So we actually have data showing that that natural disasters are increasing, and that with that, economic damages and increased risk. And then when we think about how these different types of phenomenon interact and compound with one another, we can also think about how, effects such as sea level rise amplify the impacts of coastal storms and other, natural disasters that our region is facing. If you look, for instance, at how sea level rise can amplify storm surge, we can think of how sea level is, sets a baseline for what storm surge might be in a potential coastal storm event. And as sea level rises, so too does the coverage or amount of area that could be impacted by storm surge, and so too does the floodplain expand as well, as this graphic here illustrates. So again, when thinking about planning for the future, we need to be thinking about those future conditions, and future timeframes and planning horizons where, we have pretty good credible data showing, where floodplains and flood risk may be expanding in coastal areas. And the last sort of major impact I wanted to highlight in this kind of quick high-level overview is, of course, precipitation. I think that might be one hazard that in earlier stages of resilience planning maybe was overlooked or not given as much attention, but I think particularly for our region, it's something that people are increasingly are becoming more aware of its extreme, threat and the risk posed by it, and in some cases, and fatal. In our region, as the graphs and images show on this slide, then we are firstly experiencing more precipitation just annually on average, as the chart shows in the map as well in our region. That's something that the Northeast is experiencing in particular. But it's not necessarily that we are just experiencing more precipitation gradually or evenly, and that we're just getting wetter. It's actually that we're also really experiencing more rainfall in really in shorter bursts, in shorter periods of time, and what people are also referring to as cloudburst events. So as you can see from this image taken from the National Climate Assessment, you can see that our region of the Northeast is receiving more precipitation in the heaviest 1% of rainfall events. So more rainfall in really short, heavy periods of time. And quite alarmingly as well, you can see, at least for New York City, as this data shows, that the four highest hourly rainfall rates on record have all happened in the last 4 years. That is pretty stark, I think, data showing that this is something that we're now really dealing with and contending with right now as a really recent development, and is something that our infrastructure is really not built to handle. So as you can see, when we get really heavy rainfall events, stormwater infrastructure often cannot handle that. Infrastructure is often really built for lower rainfall rates, and what that can lead to is sewage backups, sewage overflows, and really, really extreme flooding in developed areas. And then, of course, with that comes the negative impacts to water quality as well, whether that's through a CSO event when rainfall discharges into the Long Island Sound, or when a heavy rainfall event causes runoff and erosion to also negatively impact water quality as well, as shown by the image on the right. So I know that was a lot of information and a very kind of just glossing over the surface, but what I'm hoping is that just sets the stage for the conversations to follow today and some of the issues that we're talking about today, and what we need to be kind of planning for and how to plan for them. I'll leave you here with some of the data sources that came from, and we'll be sharing all these at the end of the presentation as well. And now I'll pass to my colleague Deb for some more information on tools to understand risk and vulnerability.
Thanks, Ben. I'm Deba Bibu. I'm the Sustainable and Resilient Communities Extension Professional over in Western Connecticut. And next, we wanted to think about these general impacts we just discussed in terms of what the more specific consequences could be in our communities. So let's picture a hypothetical coastal community. On the left, you can see current conditions. There's some infrastructure and buildings that are pretty close to the coastline. You can see some exposure to potential hazards. And there's some protection offered, some man-made protection, some wetlands in the area that might leave room for solutions. On the right here, you can see as hazards are increasing, there's sea level rising, there's seawater seeping into fresh groundwater, there's shoreline erosion, bluff erosion, and of course, you can see flooding in the developed areas. So we will revisit this later, thinking about the consequences of the hazards and also what we might be able to do. As you can tell, we are now in the uplifting part of the session and thinking about, how much worse are things going to get? As Homer points out, we might generally expect for many of these impacts to become more frequent and more intense in the future. We want to see now what this might specifically look like in our region. To do this, we're going to showcase several tools to assist with understanding your risk and vulnerabilities. You'll be able to find the tools that we cover in the presentation on our LIS Resilience Resource Hub website. And as mentioned before, they'll also be provided following the workshop series. First, we're going to take a look at the New York State Sea Level Rise Viewer. We're here in Port Jefferson, and you can see today's floodplain in dark blue, and this is set to a 24-inch sea level rise and 100-year flood event scenario in the lighter blue. And with this tool, you can play with the different scenarios. So here's what 60 inches of sea level rise in addition to the 100-year event would look like. And you could see the floodplain area grow. Next, we have a new tool from First Street that's being provided by the Connecticut Insurance Department. And this one focuses more on property level climate risk assessments, although it does offer some neighborhood and town level information. This allows homeowners and businesses to identify risks and to get highly specific information about their assets. So for example, if you are the Two Roads Brewery here, you can put in your address and understand your risk in terms of flooding, wind, heat, and other factors. So to consider your specific, property asset. It also provides cost estimates for preventative measures and flood damage forecasting. So this is something that could be helpful for communities looking more, drilling down a little bit more specifically. Other tools that help put risks into context can overlay the flood hazards with community features and assets. So as part of NOAA's Digital Coast suite of tools, one I wanted to highlight is the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper. And this can help communities assess coastal hazard risks and vulnerabilities. And it provides some really easy to share maps that can show impacts to people, natural resources, and facilities exposed to coastal flooding. Similarly, we have Circa's Climate Change Vulnerability Index, or CCVI tool, and this combines the built environment, social, and ecological aspects to help assess vulnerability. This tool is available both for flooding and heat. And as depicted here, you can assess flood vulnerability, say at the town level, and it goes beyond that to assess adaptive capacity as well. So there are many other useful tools for various climate risk and vulnerability assessments. Again, we keep the most relevant ones for our region on our resource hub. And I wanted to just highlight a few more that you can find. So specific to New York City, there's the NYC Flood Hazard Mapper and NYC Stormwater Flood Maps. In Connecticut, in addition to what we showed before, there's also Circa's Sea Level Rise and Storm Surge Viewer, which includes the option to consider storm surge impacts along with sea level rise. There's the TNC Coastal Resilience Tool, which also features the ability to overlay critical facilities with flood and sea level rise risks. And then not specific to any region, national level tools, the NOAA Digital Coast suite of tools has a lot. And in particular, their Sea Level Rise Viewer is great, has a really easy user interface. And there's the Coastal County Snapshots tool, which is really helpful for quantifying risk in understandable terms, like in terms of cost or the amount of homes at risk. Another aspect to consider is the compound effects of multiple flood drivers. So in this image, you can see that there are impacts from precipitation, from coastal flooding, which could be from storm surge or tidal, and then also from shallow water tables where they intersect with the surface or with infrastructure, which is called groundwater emergence. So how do we understand things, when they are happening at the same time, or what our risk is there? So USGS is nearing completion of a regional assessment of the compound flood hazard from the combined effects of coastal stormwater and groundwater emergence flooding. We wanted to highlight that trainings and workshops to learn more about how to use the assessment and mapper are planned for 2026. So if you are interested in participating in further training and workshops to learn how to use the tool, please open the Google form that was just put into the chat, and you can enter your name, email, and municipality or organization there, and we'll follow up with you regarding those trainings in 2026. Another tool we'd like to mention is MyCoast. MyCoast is a community science-driven tool that encourages people to take photos of flooding, high tides, and storm damage, and then upload it to this public database. And then the photos have time and location data that can help see where consistent flooding is happening. Then you can use these photos in grant applications, and they can help inform local planning or give insight into what communities are facing during these extreme high tide and storm events. So New York and Connecticut both have access to these programs, and you're going to get to hear about what's available to you in today's breakout sessions. Now I will pass it off to Elizabeth to speak more about adaptation strategies.
Thank you, Deb. Good morning, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Hornstein, the Sustainable and Resilient Communities Extension Professional in Suffolk County, New York. Okay, so we are now going to move on to the next step, plan, and talk about strategies to reduce vulnerability. But before we do that, we have a poll that we wanted to ask you, which it looks like some of you have already filled out, but that is fine. So we can re-put the instructions to access the poll in the chat. But we wanted to know, are you new to resilience planning? Are you somewhat familiar with resilience planning resources and strategies? Or are you really familiar and already actively engaged in resilience planning, but still joined today looking to learn a few new things? So we'll give everyone a few seconds to answer this poll question. Okay, it looks like we have a mix here of new folks, some that are somewhat familiar, and others that are actively engaged. Hopefully everyone will learn something new though today. And you should still be able to answer as I click away. Okay, so I wanted to start off with this graphic from a fact sheet created by one of my New York Sea Grant colleagues. I think it does a great job of showcasing the suite of general adaptation strategies that are available to communities. This includes raising awareness, which I think is often overlooked, but educating the community about risks and actions they can take to mitigate risks is very important. Next, we have plan and importantly enforce, conserve and restore natural areas, accommodate, so updating infrastructure to better withstand risks. We could relocate, or we may choose to try to defend and protect, or we may choose to do nothing, which could be appropriate if the risk is low and manageable. So we're going to dive into some more specifics on these and examples. And I want to start out by talking about plans because one of the first steps that you can take is to start incorporating climate impacts and risks into all of your municipal and community plans, like your master or comprehensive plan. You may also want to take the next step and consider undertaking a specific climate vulnerability assessment and developing an adaptation plan that lays out, what are the key vulnerabilities in your community, and then what are the strategies that you can use to reduce risk. The plan could focus on all risks or maybe a major risk in your community like flooding. Another thing to think about is collaborating with your neighboring communities when you're engaging in these planning processes. This can increase impact and success because what your neighbor is doing is likely having an impact in your community and vice versa. And then in addition to developing plans that can help your community mitigate risk, it's also important to have emergency response plans in place for when nature does strike. And when developing any of these plans, it's vital to engage community members at every step. Part of the planning processes should include reviewing policies and regulations in your community and looking at how these could be strengthened to increase resilience. For example, you might want to look at updating your zoning codes, strengthening your wetland and shoreline codes, or your stormwater control measures. You could also use your codes to incentivize certain strategies like nature-based solutions, which we'll be talking a little bit more about in a few minutes. Or you could use them to have new policies that could help you fund and implement resilience strategies down the line. An example of this is Connecticut recently passed a new law that allows municipalities to create resilience improvement districts to help them fund and implement projects for adaptation. The districts are based on a tax increment financing model where the projects are intended to increase property values and thus property tax revenue over time to help pay for the project. Another widely used financing tool is stormwater utilities. These are fees based on the relative amount of impervious surface on your property, the revenue of which can then be used for stormwater management. And on the right here, I have two great resources that can help your community review and update your regulations and code. The Resilience Implementation and Strategic Enhancements, or RISE, local assessment tool was developed by EPA and FEMA and helps you do a very detailed assessment of your plans, policies, and regulations. And then New York State model local laws to increase resilience provides some great examples of laws that you could adapt and adopt in your own community. So in the next few slides, we're now going to talk about some strategies to address at-risk infrastructure. Infrastructure may need to be upgraded to accommodate increased risks or even relocated or removed. For instance, you might have a roadway that's constantly under threat from coastal flooding. So you may want to look at raising it to levels that can better withstand rising water. We also want to look at our tidal and stream roadway crossings to ensure that those structures are properly sized to accommodate rising water levels and increase stormwater flow. Making sure these are properly sized not only enhances resilience, but it can also provide other ecological benefits like increased habitat and wildlife connectivity. We also want to look at our dams to ensure that they are structurally sound. The photo on the right shows a collapsed dam and roadway in Stony Brook that occurred during an intense rainstorm event in August 2024. And you can see it's pretty bad there. Dam removal can eliminate risk and enhance resilience, as well as provide many other ecological benefits, but sometimes this may not be feasible or desired by the community. So an alternative can be to look at enhancements to increase the resilience of the structure. It's also important to look at our stormwater and wastewater infrastructure. As we discussed earlier, much of today's stormwater infrastructure is not really designed to handle the intense rainfalls that we've been experiencing. So we need to look at what we can do to upgrade our stormwater management systems. This could be accomplished through a combination of more conventional or gray infrastructure, as shown in the picture on the left, and also green infrastructure, which I will talk more about in a few minutes. And it may require some innovative solutions in engineering. Upgrading outdated or vulnerable wastewater infrastructure can also enhance water quality and resilience in your community. The photo on the right is showing an enhanced nitrogen removal septic system being installed to replace a cesspool at a house on Centerport Harbor in New York. And then, of course, we also need to think about how to address at-risk housing, businesses, and other critical infrastructure like fire departments and police stations. Options could include elevating structures, relocating them out of harm's way, or installing new infrastructure to try to hold the line and protect our assets. It's important to keep in mind, though, that when putting up protection or defense structures, they're often going to require maintenance and there's still going to be some risk. Defending against nature can be a challenge. In the picture on the right, we see an example of a coastal home that's chosen to install a seawall to try to provide protection, but we also see that that seawall is crumbling. Last but not least, we will discuss using natural and nature-based solutions to increase community resilience. Natural coastal habitats are one of our best defenses against climate impacts. So it's important that we protect and restore these habitats whenever we can. Beaches, dunes, wetlands, coastal bluffs, seagrass beds, oyster reefs, they all provide critical storm protection and many other ecosystem services. For example, wetlands help to filter out pollutants from stormwater runoff. It's really important to have that buffer between the water and our built communities wherever we can. We can also use nature-based solutions to enhance resilience in more upland areas. This could include forest restoration or riparian or vegetative buffers along rivers and streams. I'm sorry, that's the next slide. So apologies. We can also use these nature-based components for shoreline protection projects as an alternative to seawalls and other traditional infrastructure. So the two pictures here are showing living shoreline projects, not forest restoration. And these living shoreline projects, they use natural components like marsh grass and shellfish alone or in combination with structural components. The photo on the left is a picture of a living shoreline project from Fenwick, Connecticut, which included beach nourishment, plantings, and rock sills. And then the picture on the right is an example of a living shoreline project for Stratford, Connecticut, that used artificial reefs in conjunction with restored marsh and dune habitat. And there's increasing evidence that these living shoreline projects are often more cost-effective and successful than traditional seawalls, but it is important to keep in mind these may not be feasible everywhere. Okay. So now we can also use nature-based solutions in upland areas, which could include forest restoration or riparian or vegetative buffers. And these can contribute to cleaner air and water, shade and canopy cover, and protection and restoration of critical habitat. And then we can even incorporate nature into our stormwater management strategies, often referred to as green infrastructure. We have 3 different types of green infrastructure shown here: a constructed stormwater wetland, a bioswale, and a rain garden. These solutions help to absorb stormwater and filter pollutants before they enter our waterways, and can also reduce flooding during heavy rain events. The constructed stormwater wetland on the left there was built specifically to address flooding of a parking lot at a popular beach and has been quite successful. And if you want to learn more about these nature-based solutions, I highly encourage you to attend this session this afternoon. It's going to be entirely focused on this topic, and we're going to have a great panel discussion. Okay, so here again is our hypothetical coastal community that we saw earlier from Deb that was being threatened by rising water levels. So let's take a look at what strategies this hypothetical community might have chosen to implement. So we see that they have relocated some of their vulnerable structures, moving them into existing communities and even creating a new community in an open space. We also see that they restored natural wetlands to enhance resilience and provide increased protection. In another area, we see that they chose to try to defend structures using a living shoreline. And then we see that their lighthouse that was falling off the cliff there has been retreated landward. So they employed a variety of different strategies. When deciding what strategies you should employ, that can be difficult, particularly when you're thinking about, should we relocate a structure or try to hold the line? It's important to consider things like cost, sustainability, and feasibility. How long can the infrastructure actually be protected for? Also, though, you want to consider cultural and community significance and other social, ecological, and economic impacts. Fortunately, to help you think through these various factors and identify appropriate and impactful strategies, we've developed a resilience planning guide. Our guide is available on our Resource Hub site and as a brochure. We utilize the PERSIST framework, which we adapted and adopted from the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. And it includes 8 criteria to think through as you identify and develop strategies and projects. Permittable, so can you get all the necessary permits and permissions? Engaged, have you considered input from community members? Realistic, has community, can you realistically, achieve this project? Safe, does it at least enhance or maintain the well-being of communities? Innovative, have you thought about using those nature-based solutions or other outside-the-box ideas? Scientific, are you incorporating the best available science that Ben and Deb went over earlier? Transferable, can it serve as a model for other communities? And sustainable, will it be socially, economically, and ecologically sustainable in the long term? And for each of these criteria, we have a set of guiding questions to help you think about each of them. And on our Resource Hub website, you can also find resources related to each of these criteria. So for instance, for engaged, you can find resources on best practices to engage community members and other types of resources that can help you. And then I also wanted to highlight that we have a case studies page that includes a mapper and a database that showcases resilience projects that are already happening around the Long Island Sound watershed. So you can find a bunch of projects here, and for each project, you can find all the details like how much did it cost, what funding sources did they use, how well did it work. So you can see what your neighbors have implemented and maybe get some ideas for your own community. So we have been covering a lot today, and you may be saying to yourself, this is all great information, but my community doesn't have the resources really to engage in these types of planning processes. We have limited time and staff. The good news is that our team offers 2 assistance programs to help address these capacity barriers. We have a planning support program that's offered annually and provides support to help communities assess environmental risks, develop conceptual project plans, and conduct preliminary planning efforts so that you're then ready to move to that next stage to pursue design and implementation. Participating communities are matched with a qualified contractor to support their planning needs. And we just opened the 3rd round a few days ago, so we'll put the link in the chat so you can access that opportunity. But if you're interested in learning more, I really encourage you to attend tomorrow morning's workshop session. It will be focused on our planning support program, and you'll be able to hear from some of the current awardees of that program. We also have a grant writing assistance program. This one provides up to $9,950 to allow you to bring on a consultant to help with grant preparation. It's open on a rolling basis and includes a pretty simple Google form application. And if you're not sure which program might be right for you to use, you check out our handy infographic available on our assistance program page and shown here on the left. It can help you kind of figure out which one you might want to pursue. And then before we close out this section, I want to note that we also have a funding database that can help you find grants to develop and implement your plans and strategies, because we're always looking for funding, right? So that we can actually do these things. You can use our handy filters to find funding opportunities that are relevant for your organization and project. You can view both open and upcoming opportunities and filter them by phase, location, topic, and eligibility. And I just wanted to highlight a few of the opportunities that are currently open and some that are going to be upcoming. So open opportunities are shown here. There's 2 from Connecticut, a new Long Island Sound Ecosystems Grant Program and the Connecticut Deep Climate Resilience Fund. Both of these are providing funding for both planning and construction for resilience projects. In New York, through the Nature Conservancy, there's a climate resilience grant program that's providing small grants for conservation and climate adaptation projects. We also have the New York State Environmental Bond Act, and through this funding source, new grant programs are constantly being released. Currently available is the Open Space Conservation Grant Program. And then upcoming opportunities are shown here. On Monday, the Long Island Sound Stewardship Fund is going to be released. This one is only for nonprofits, but if you're a nonprofit, keep an eye out. It provides funding for a wide variety of projects to restore and protect the health and living resources of Long Island Sound. The Long Island Sound Futures Fund is the biggest grant that's available through the Long Island Sound Partnership, and again, provides funding for a really wide range of projects for water quality improvement, habitat restoration, resilience, and more. And this one typically opens in March. And then finally, the New York State Consolidated Funding Application. This one usually opens in May, and it provides access to multiple state funding sources through a single application. And if you want to learn more about funding, I just want to plug for you that we do host regional in-person funding workshops in the spring that do provide an opportunity to hear directly from federal, state, and local funding programs and to speak with these program officers about your project ideas and applications. So hopefully we'll see many of you in the spring at this workshop. And that is it. I know that was a lot, so I think we have a few minutes now for questions, and I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to facilitate that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And thanks, Deb and Ben. That was a lot of information for sure. I'd like to take a couple minutes now to just see if we have any questions from the attendees. You can put your questions in the chat if you'd like to ask something. But as we've mentioned previously, we'll be sharing out all of these materials, the slides, the links to every tool and resource that we covered after the workshop. So you all can dive in a little deeper and certainly reach out if you have questions then when you have time to digest. All right, well, I'm seeing some thank yous, and thank you for being on. Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay. Oh, I see one from Marjorie. Do composting programs qualify for some of these grants? Do you know?
Yes, I do remember there is a New York State grant that is available for composting programs. I remember we did fund somebody through our grant writing assistance program that wanted to do like a sustainability composting project. So we can make sure to find that one for you and provide it in the follow-up materials. I'm not remembering the name off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. All right. So in the interest of time, oh, okay, I see one more question. I'm just gonna answer this one from Laura. So when you said you link communities with contractors, what do you mean? Laura, I can just answer that quickly before we go into the next part of the session. So for our assistance programs, for the planning support program, you'll hear all about that more if you tune into our Friday session. But for the planning support program, we collect projects from communities who need planning support, and we put out an RFP to competitively procure contractors to match the best suited contractor with that project. And then all of that is coordinated through us to actually conduct the work of that planning support project. And then for grant writing support, the community actually selects the contractor that they would like to work with to apply to a grant. But we do have a contractors list that people can search through if they'd like some preliminary ideas about who might be a good contractor to reach out to. So I hope that answers your question. So we'll have time now to go into breakout rooms. One of the components of this whole kind of framework of learning and planning and implementing is these state climate certification programs. So we're lucky that in New York and Connecticut, we have two programs that can help communities at the local level complete some of these actions and provide guidance. So in New York, we have New York State Climate Smart Communities Program, and in Connecticut, we have Sustainable CT. Both programs offer assistance and a pathway to taking steps to repair and mitigate the impacts of a changing climate. So both of these maps here on the screen show either the communities in each state that are registered or certified. And you'll learn a little bit more about what that means and what communities in your area might be participating or interested in participating. So I want to give a big thank you to our guest speakers who are on today, and they will be presenting more about the New York State Climate Smart Communities Program in New York and Sustainable CT in Connecticut. So we have Sophie DiTommaso, Mary Lambert, Sarah Orrell, who will be talking more about New York State Climate Smart Communities Program in our New York breakout session, and Jess Coonan with New York Sea Grant, who is going to be talking more about My Coast, New York. So that citizen science tool to report flooding and storm impacts that we mentioned earlier. And in the Connecticut breakout session, we're going to have Kate Richard, who's with Sustainable CT. She's the program director for sustainability best practices. And then we also have Sarah Schechter, who is going to be talking more about My Coast in Connecticut. And she's our Sustainable and Resilient Communities Extension professional for Eastern Connecticut. Okay, so in just a moment or so, we're going to open up those two breakout rooms. So one for New York and one for Connecticut. You will be given the option to select which one you'd like to join. And we will be in those breakout rooms for nearly the rest of the hour that we have for this session. And so we'll wrap up just before 12 o'clock, and we'll come back to this main room and have some closing remarks and reminders about the next two sessions in this annual workshop series. So my colleague, Sarah Powell, is going to open up those breakout rooms. You should see in your bottom toolbar the ability to join either the New York or Connecticut breakout room. And if you're having issues joining, please put in the chat which one you would like to join, say either New York or Connecticut, and please be patient as Sarah Powell helps you get to that room that you'd like to go to. So we'll see you all in those rooms. Everybody. Okay, so we're back in the main room. I hope everybody had some really great conversations and found the information to be really useful in those breakout sessions. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question or get answers to it, we'll follow up with you after the session to help connect you and provide answers to your questions. I did want to thank our speakers again for your time and providing your slides and information. It's been fantastic. I hope all of you learned a lot of information on this webinar, and please look out for the recording and materials after this session. Please tune in to our next session, which will be this afternoon starting at 1 o'clock. That session will focus on nature-based solutions for resilience, and will feature a panel discussion on common challenges and strategies for success. And then our third and final session will be tomorrow morning from 10 to 11:30. As we mentioned, we'll be highlighting the Long Island Sound Resilience Planning Support Program, and there will be communities presenting on their projects that they have completed through the first round of that program and what they have accomplished and what their next steps are. So please register if you have not already. And then a final thoughts before we leave. We do have a feedback form that we would love for you all to fill out and send us feedback on. So there's a QR code on this screen that you can just scan and fill that out. Or there's a link in the chat to that feedback form. And as a third option, just to make sure we got you, when you close out this meeting and leave the meeting, it'll pop up on your screen. So if you have the time, please provide feedback. It's really useful to us to improve everything and provide better content to you going forward. So with that, I will conclude the session. Thank you all for joining. I think this has been really useful, and hope you all learned a lot. And we certainly welcome you to reach out to us or any of the panelists when you have time or have questions. Thank you so much.